My name is Harold. Harold Eugene Mercer. I am 72 years old. And on the coldest night of the year, a Tuesday in January, when the snow was falling so thick and heavy that you could barely see your own hand in front of your face, my son opened the front door of the house I had paid for, looked me straight in my eyes, and said 7 words that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Get out, old man. You are a burden." I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not beg. I simply picked up the small bag that his wife had already packed for me. She had packed it 2 days earlier, as if she had been planning this moment, as if it was something to look forward to. And I walked out into the snow. I was wearing my old brown cardigan, the one my late wife, Margaret, had knitted for me the winter before the cancer took her. It had a small hole near the left elbow. I had never fixed it because somehow that little hole made me feel like she was still nearby. That cardigan was not made for a snowstorm. My slippers, yes, I said slippers, were soaked through before I even reached the end of the driveway. I was 72 years old, standing in a blizzard with nowhere to go, and somewhere behind me, through the closed door of a warm house, I could hear my daughter-in-law, Sandra, laughing. Now, before I tell you what happened 3 hours later, before I tell you about the phone call that made my son go pale as a ghost, before I tell you what he found when he walked into that room and froze in the doorway and whispered, "This can't be true. I can't believe you did this," I need to take you back to the beginning, because this story did not start on a cold Tuesday night. It started 43 years ago in a small house on Birchwood Lane, with a little boy who called me Daddy and held my hand crossing the street. And it ended, or so they thought, with that same boy throwing his father into the snow. Stay with me. I promise you, by the time this story is over, you will understand something about life, about family, and about the kind of love that never disappears, no matter how many people try to bury it. I was a carpenter for 38 years, not the fancy kind, not the kind that designs expensive furniture for rich people's showrooms. I was the kind of carpenter who fixed broken porch steps for elderly widows, who built kitchen cabinets for young couples just starting out, who showed up on time and charged a fair price, and always did the job right. Margaret used to say, "Harold, you could charge twice as much and no one would complain." And I would say, "Maggie, if I charge a fair price, I can sleep at night." That was who I was. We had one son, Daniel, born on a bright April morning in 1981, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with his mother's eyes and my stubborn chin. The moment the nurse placed him in my arms, I made a silent promise. I said not out loud, but deep inside where promises really live, "I will give you everything I have. I will make sure you never go without." And I kept that promise. I worked 6 days a week for most of Daniel's childhood. I missed some little league games. I missed one school play, and I still feel guilty about that to this day. But I made sure Daniel had new shoes every year. I made sure there was food on the table and heat in the winter. I made sure he went to a good college, even though it meant I worked an extra job on weekends refinishing hardwood floors. He graduated with a degree in business, got a good job at a finance company downtown, married Sandra when he was 31. I tried to love Sandra, I really did. She was a pretty woman, sharp dresser, always had her nails done. She smiled a lot, but I noticed, even at the wedding, that her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. She had the smile of someone who is being polite, and there is a big difference between being polite and being warm. But Daniel loved her, and Daniel was happy, so I told myself that was enough. Margaret passed away 4 years into their marriage. Breast cancer, she fought hard, 18 months of fighting, and then one quiet Sunday morning in October, she simply let go. I held her hand when she went. I told her I loved her. I told her I would be okay. I lied about the second part, but I meant the first with everything in me. After Margaret died, I rattled around in our old house on Birchwood Lane for about 2 years. Daniel called every Sunday. He visited for holidays. It was fine. It was lonely, but it was fine. And then, 3 years ago, Daniel came to me with an idea. We were sitting at my kitchen table. He had a cup of coffee. I had my tea, and he said, "Dad, we want you to come live with us." I looked at him over the rim of my mug. I said, "Are you sure that's what Sandra wants?" He waved his hand like he was swatting away a fly. "Of course, Dad. She suggested it herself." That surprised me, but I thought maybe I had misjudged her. Maybe she had grown. Maybe family meant something to her now. So I sold the house on Birchwood Lane. The house where Daniel was born. The house where Margaret and I had shared 34 years of breakfasts and arguments and laughter and tears. I sold it, and I moved into Daniel and Sandra's house. I gave Daniel $60,000 from the sale. He said it was to help with the mortgage. He said it was an investment in our future together. I thought that was a beautiful way to put it. I should have paid more attention to which word he emphasized. The first few months were peaceful enough. I had my own room, ground floor, which was good for my knees. I helped around the house. I fixed the squeaky step on the staircase. I repainted the garden fence. I babysat my grandson, Tommy, who was 6 years old, and the best thing in my life since Margaret. Tommy used to crawl into my lap in the evenings and ask me to tell him stories. I would tell him about the old days, about his grandmother, about the time I built a treehouse with nothing but scrap wood and borrowed tools. His eyes would go wide like 2 little moons. "Grandpa," he would say, "you're the best storyteller in the world." Those evenings with Tommy, those were my reason for staying. But slowly, quietly, like water getting into the foundation of a house, things began to change. It started with small things. Sandra would make dinner for 3 herself, Daniel and Tommy, and then look at me and say, "Oh, Harold, I assumed you'd eaten already. There's some bread in the pantry." The first time I said nothing. I made myself a sandwich and I ate alone in my room. The second time, I mentioned it gently to Daniel. He looked uncomfortable and said, "Dad, Sandra works really hard. Maybe just let her know in advance if you want to eat with us." I stared at my son for a long moment, and then I nodded and said, "Of course." What I did not say was, "This is partly my house. I helped pay for this house." I should not have to apply for permission to eat dinner, but I stayed silent because I did not want to cause trouble, because I truly believed, that Daniel was a good man who was simply caught between 2 people he loved. I was wrong about which direction he was leaning. Sandra began to make comments, little ones at first. When I would sit in the living room watching the evening news, she would walk through and say something like, "I just think it's a lot of electricity for one person watching TV all day." When I would use the kitchen to make myself breakfast, she would come in and wipe down the counter behind me with a pointed look, as if I had made some terrible mess. And then she started talking to Daniel. I don't know exactly what she said to him behind closed doors. I only know the result because slowly, over months, my son began to change. He stopped calling me Dad in front of Sandra. He started calling me Harold. He stopped asking how I was feeling. He stopped sitting with me in the evenings. And he started agreeing with Sandra. One night I was sitting with Tommy, telling him a bedtime story, when Sandra appeared in the doorway. "Tommy needs to sleep," she said. "Harold, please don't fill his head with all those old stories. He has school tomorrow." Tommy looked at her, then back at me. His little face was confused. I kissed his forehead. "Good night, my boy," I said. I walked out of that room with a smile on my face. But inside, something cracked, just a little, like the first hairline fracture in a piece of glass that hasn't fallen yet. The worst moment, the moment I should have seen the truth clearly, came about 6 months before the snowstorm. I overheard them arguing. I was not trying to listen. I was simply walking down the hallway to use the bathroom at 2 in the morning. And through their bedroom door, I heard Sandra's voice, sharp and certain, the way she always was when she had already decided something. He's been here 3 years, Daniel, 3 years. This was supposed to be temporary. Daniel's voice, low and uncertain. He's my father, Sandra. Where would he even go? That's not our problem. He sold his house. He has money. He can find a retirement community or something. I cannot keep living like this, Daniel. I need my home back. I need my space. A long pause. He gave us $60,000, and we thank him for that, but money doesn't obligate us to house him forever. Another pause. And then Daniel's voice, and this is the part that broke something inside me that I am not sure has fully healed, said, "Okay, I'll figure something out." I stood in that hallway for a long time. I was wearing my brown cardigan, the one with the hole in the elbow. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought about Margaret. I thought about what she would say. She would say, "Harold, do not let them see you cry, and do not leave without your dignity." So I decided right then that no matter what came next, I would not beg, I would not argue, I would not make a scene. I would simply be who I had always been, and I would wait, because I had lived 72 years and I knew one thing for certain: the truth always comes out. January arrived like a punishment. The winter that year was the worst in 20 years. The news kept talking about it. Record snowfall, dangerous wind chills, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. It was a Tuesday, January the 14th. I had spent the morning quietly. I made my tea. I read my newspaper. I had asked Sandra the night before if I could help prepare dinner, and she had looked at me with those cold eyes and said, "Just stay out of the kitchen, Harold, please." So I stayed in my room mostly. I could hear Sandra on the phone with her sister for most of the afternoon. I caught pieces of it. She wasn't trying to be quiet. "I've had enough, Christine, yes. Tonight Daniel already agreed. I know, but it has to be done." I knew what was coming. I had known for months, honestly. I just didn't know they would choose a Tuesday in January with 8 inches of snow forecast. Daniel came home from work at 6 o'clock. I heard the front door. I heard Sandra greet him in the hallway, heard the low, urgent whisper of a conversation I was not supposed to hear. At 6:30, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. Dad. He still called me Dad, at least. I will give him that. "Come in," I said. He opened the door and stood there. He was still in his work coat. He had not even taken it off. That told me everything. He had come straight from the hallway to my door, still carrying whatever Sandra had just loaded onto him. He looked tired. He looked guilty. He looked like a man who had made a decision he knew was wrong and was going to go through with it anyway. "Dad, we need to talk." "All right," I said. I put my book down. I folded my hands in my lap. I waited. "Sandra and I have been talking, and it's not working, Dad. Having you here, it's been hard on her, on the household, and we think it would be better if you found somewhere else to be." I looked at my son. I thought about the night he was born, how I held him and made that silent promise. I thought about his first day of school, how he had cried and I had knelt down in the parking lot and said, "Daniel, I promise, I will be right here when you get out." And I was. I was always right there. I said, very quietly, "Tonight." He couldn't look at me. "Sandra already packed a bag for you." "I see. I'll drive you to a motel." Sandra's voice came from the hallway. She had been standing just outside, listening, ready. "There's a bus," she said, stepping into the doorway. "The 47 runs until 9. He can take that." I looked at Sandra. I looked at my son, and then I stood up. Slowly, because my knees are not what they once were, I picked up the bag that was sitting on the chair. She had placed it there herself, probably while I was in the bathroom, and I said one thing. "Where is Tommy?" Sandra's jaw tightened. "He's at a playdate. He won't be home until tomorrow." She had planned that too. She had made sure my grandson wasn't home to see this. Some small mercy in all the cruelty, I suppose. Or perhaps she just didn't want to explain it to a 9-year-old. I walked to the front door. Daniel followed me, and I could see he was struggling. I could see the conflict in his face. I thought for just one moment that he might stop me, that he might say, "Wait, Dad, I'm sorry, come back inside." But Sandra was behind him, and Sandra was louder than his conscience. I opened the front door myself. The cold hit me like a wall. The snow was already coming down hard. The wind was picking up. The driveway was white, and the streetlights were just orange blurs in the dark. I stepped outside, and then I heard it, from behind me, Sandra's voice, sharp and satisfied. "Get out, you useless burden." I stopped. I did not turn around. I heard Daniel, and this is the part I pray he remembers every day for the rest of his life, say nothing. Not one word. He stood there while his wife said those words to his father, and he said absolutely nothing. I walked down the driveway. I heard the door close behind me. I kept walking. I was wearing my brown cardigan, my slippers, no hat, no gloves. I was 72 years old in a blizzard, and I want you to understand something about that moment. I was not afraid. I was not angry. I was heartbroken, yes, more than I can tell you, but I was not afraid. I had lived a good life. I had kept my promises. I had loved my wife, raised my son, served my community, and worked with my hands for 38 years. Whatever happened next, I knew who I was. Now here is the part of the story that nobody, not Daniel, not Sandra, not even the kind police officer who would later make the phone call, knew about until that night. What Sandra didn't know, what Daniel had apparently forgotten, or never known, was that I had a sister. Her name was Ruth. Ruth was 4 years younger than me. She had lived her whole life in the same town, about 2 miles from Daniel's house. Ruth had never married. She was a retired schoolteacher, stubborn as a fence post, and one of the sharpest women I have ever known. Ruth and I had spoken on the phone every single Thursday for the past 40 years, without fail. And 3 weeks earlier, I had called Ruth on a Thursday, like always, and I had told her everything. I told her about the conversations I had overheard, about the dinners I was excluded from, about the slow, quiet way they had been making me feel invisible. Ruth had been silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Harold, I want you to listen to me very carefully." "I'm listening." I said, "You are not going to wait for them to humiliate you. You are going to come and live with me. I have the guest room. I have the garden where you can put her about. And I have a pot roast in the oven. That is better than anything you've eaten in 3 years. I promise you that." I had laughed, first real laugh in months. "Ruth," I said, "I think I might take you up on that." "Good," she said. "And Harold, get yourself a lawyer. I have a friend, retired now, but sharp as a tack. His name is Michael Ocaffer. I want you to call him." "What for?" "Because $60,000 is $60,000, Harold. And a verbal agreement is still an agreement. And I want to make sure that when the time comes, you have someone in your corner." I had called Michael Ocaffer the very next day. We had 3 quiet meetings over 2 weeks. I showed him the bank records, the transfer, the text messages from Daniel, the ones where he wrote, "Dad, this is an investment in our future together. We'll take care of you, I promise." Michael had read those messages carefully. He had nodded slowly, the way lawyers do when they know something you don't. "Harold," he had said, "this is not nothing." Now, on that Tuesday night, in the blizzard, I walked 2 miles through the snow in my slippers and my cardigan. Was it dangerous? Yes. Was I scared? A little by the end, I won't lie to you. Was it worth it? Keep listening. I arrived at Ruth's house, cold, soaked, my feet numb, my hands shaking, and knocked on her door. She opened it immediately, like she had been watching from the window, which she had. She took one look at me and said, "Get in here, you stubborn old fool. She wrapped me in a blanket. She made me hot soup. She sat across from me at her kitchen table while I thawed out, and she said nothing, just watched me with those quiet, wise eyes. When I had eaten and my hands had stopped shaking, she said, "Did they hurt you?" I thought about Sandra's voice. "Get out, you useless burden," they tried. I said. Ruth nodded. "Then tomorrow we call Michael." But before tomorrow came, before any of that, something happened that none of us had planned. Because of the cold, because I am 70, too, because 2 miles in a blizzard in a thin cardigan and slippers is not something a human body takes lightly. About an hour after I arrived at Ruth's, I began to shake, really shake, not just cold, something deeper. My chest felt tight. My fingers were still bluish. Ruth took one look at me and called an ambulance. The paramedics were kind. A young woman named Carrie, with red hair tucked under her cap, wrapped me in a thermal blanket and talked to me in a calm, steady voice while they loaded me into the ambulance. She asked my name, my age, whether I had any heart conditions. I told her I had mild hypertension, controlled by medication. She nodded, made a note, and patted my hand. I remember thinking, a stranger is holding my hand. My daughter-in-law packed my bag. My son said nothing. At the hospital, they treated me for hypothermia and mild frostbite on 2 toes. They hooked me up to a heart monitor as a precaution because of my age and the stress on my body. The doctor, a serious young man with glasses, told me I was very lucky. "Another hour outside in those conditions at your age," he said quietly, "could have been a very different story." I nodded. I understood. They admitted me for observation. Ruth sat beside my bed and held my hand all night. She had called Michael Acaffer from the hospital waiting room. He was already making notes. At approximately 11:15 that night, a police officer came to speak with me. "Standard procedure," the nurse explained, "in cases of exposure injuries in the elderly. They needed to understand how it happened." I told him, calmly, clearly, in simple words. His expression changed as I spoke. By the time I finished, his jaw was tight and his pen had stopped moving. He said, "Sir, I need to confirm you are saying you were asked to leave the premises tonight, in these weather conditions, without adequate clothing." "Yes," I said. "And you are 70, 2 years of age." "Yes." He wrote something in his notebook. He said he needed to make a call. Now I want you to picture Daniel's evening. After I left, he and Sandra had dinner. I imagine Sandra was cheerful, relieved. I imagine she opened a bottle of wine. I imagine Daniel told himself that it was for the best, that I would be fine, that I would figure something out. People do, don't they? I imagine he put it out of his mind. At 11:42 that night, his phone rang. The voice on the other end identified itself as Officer James Whitfield of the Millbrook Police Department. And Officer Whitfield asked Daniel if he knew a man named Harold Eugene Mercer. Sandra told me later, much later, in a very different tone than she had ever used before, that Daniel's face went gray, that he stood up from the couch so fast he knocked over his glass. "That's my father," Daniel said. "What happened is your father is alive and receiving treatment at Millbrook General Hospital," Officer Whitfield said. "He was admitted tonight for hypothermia and frostbite following exposure to the elements. He was found to have left a residential address tonight without adequate clothing in below freezing conditions. We'd like to speak with you." Sandra told me Daniel couldn't speak for almost 10 seconds. Then he grabbed his keys. Ruth was sitting in the chair beside my bed when Daniel appeared in the hospital room doorway at midnight. He was still in his house clothes. He had driven straight there, hadn't even changed his shoes. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were wide and red. He stood in the doorway and stared at me. I was lying in a hospital bed, connected to a monitor, with a warming blanket over me and bandaged toes. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "This can't be true." Ruth stood up from her chair. Now, I should tell you about Ruth in moments like this. Ruth spent 35 years teaching middle school. She has a voice that can cut through classroom chaos like a knife through butter, and she has a look, a particular look, that has reduced 13-year-olds to tears. She gave Daniel that look. "It is very true," Ruth said. "Every bit of it. Your father walked 2 miles through a blizzard in a cardigan and slippers because your wife called him a burden, and your voice was nowhere to be heard." Daniel's face was something I cannot fully describe. Guilt and shock, and something that looked very much like shame, a deep internal shame, the kind that doesn't come from being caught but from truly, finally seeing what you have done. "Dad," he said. "Dad, Sit down, Daniel," I said. My voice was calm, quiet. "I want you to understand that." I was not angry in that moment. I was too tired for anger. I was too old for it. What I felt was something different, something heavier. I felt sad, not for myself, for him, for the man he had almost become. He sat in the chair Ruth had vacated. "I need you to listen to me," I said, "not like a son who is embarrassed, like a man. Can you do that?" He nodded. His eyes were shining. "I don't blame you for everything," I said. "Sandra influenced you. I understand that. A man loves his wife. He wants peace in his home. I understand all of it. But Daniel, there is a line, and tonight you let that line be crossed. Tonight, your wife called your father a useless burden, and you stood there and let her, and then you closed the door." Daniel pressed his hands over his face. "I gave you $60,000, I continued. "Not because I expected to live in your house forever. I gave it because you said we were building a future together, and I believed you, because you are my son, and I have always believed you." The monitor beside me beeped steadily. "I have never in my life asked you for anything, Daniel. I worked my entire life so that you would never have to struggle the way I did. I held your mother's hand when she died. I sold the house we built together so that I could be near you. And tonight, I walked 2 miles in a snowstorm in my slippers because your wife packed my bag and you didn't say a word." Daniel was crying now, quietly, the way men cry when they are too ashamed to be loud about it. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would. I didn't think." "No," I said gently. "You didn't think. That's the truth of it." He looked up at me then, and he said something I did not expect. "She told me you'd been saying things about her to the neighbors, that you'd been undermining our marriage. She showed me text messages. She said they were from you to her sister." I stared at him. Ruth made a sharp sound. "I never sent Sandra's sister any messages," I said slowly. "Daniel, I barely know that woman's name." The color drained from my son's face. He sat very still. "She showed you text messages," I repeated. "From your number," he said, barely a whisper now. "Saying you wanted us to divorce, that you thought Sandra was a gold digger, that you were going to make her life difficult. I had never sent those messages. But Sandra had my phone in her hand once. I remembered it clearly, about 4 months ago. She had offered to help me reset a forgotten password. I had handed it over without thinking. Daniel was putting it together at the same moment I was. She fabricated them, Ruth said. Her voice was like ice. And Daniel, my son, my boy, the child I carried on my shoulders and taught to ride a bike and sat up with through fevers and nightmares, put his face in his hands and wept. The next morning, Michael Acaffer arrived at the hospital. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, with the quiet confidence of someone who has spent decades knowing exactly how things work. Daniel was still there. He had not left. He had slept in the chair beside my bed, refusing to go home. At some point in the night, I had heard him praying, very softly. I pretended to be asleep. When Michael arrived, he shook my hand and then looked at Daniel. "You must be the son," he said. Daniel stood. "Yes, sir. I'm Harold's attorney. I've been retained for the past 3 weeks. Shall we talk? What followed was a conversation that lasted about an hour. I lay in my hospital bed and listened while Michael laid it out clearly and without drama. The $60,000 transferred with written and electronic acknowledgement of its purpose. The text messages from Daniel, screenshots, carefully saved, establishing the promise of care. The documented evidence of my medical treatment following exposure that night. The police report filed by Officer Whitfield noting the circumstances of my departure. And Ruth's written statement about the condition I had arrived in at her door. Michael did not threaten. He simply informed. He said, "Harold has several options available to him. I want you to understand that before any decision is made." Daniel sat in that chair with the look of a man who was seeing, for the first time, the full shape of what he had allowed to happen. "What does my father want?" he asked. Michael looked at me. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about everything. The house on Birchwood Lane. Margaret. Tommy crawling into my lap for bedtime stories. The cardigan with the hole in the elbow. "I want my grandson," I said. "I want to be able to see Tommy. I want that to never be taken from me. The rest we can discuss." Daniel broke completely then. Not performatively, quietly, totally, like something inside him finally gave way. "Dad," he said, "I'm going to fix this. I swear to you, I am going to fix this. What happened with Sandra I will tell you, because you deserve to know the full story. When Daniel went home that morning and confronted her about the text messages, she did not deny it for long. She had a kind of pride that would not let her sustain a lie under direct examination. She had fabricated the messages. She had screenshotted a conversation with her own sister, edited the name to appear as if it came from my phone, and shown it to Daniel at a moment when he was already tired and susceptible. She had planned it for months. Daniel filed for a separation a week later. I did not ask him to. I did not encourage it. That was his decision, and his alone. And the $60,000. Michael handled it professionally. A portion was returned to me. Daniel insisted on it. Insisted far beyond what Michael had suggested. He said it was the least he could do. He said it was the beginning, not the end. I moved into Ruth's house. The guest room has a window that looks out over her garden. In spring, there are roses. Margaret would have loved it. Tommy comes every weekend, every single weekend without fail. He crawls into the armchair beside me and asks me to tell him stories. And I do. I tell him everything, not the painful parts, not yet, but the good parts. The long, rich, beautiful good parts of a life that is still going. 3 months after that night, Daniel came to Ruth's house alone. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. He had aged, I thought, not dramatically, but in the eyes. The eyes had changed. He said, "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, even if it's hard." "All right." I said, "Did you ever feel like I didn't love you? After Mom died after Sandra, did you feel like I had forgotten who you were? I looked at my son for a long time. I never doubted that you loved me," I said. "I doubted whether you remembered what love requires. Love isn't a feeling, Daniel. It's a practice. It's choosing every day to show up. You stopped showing up." He nodded slowly. "I think," he said, "I was so afraid of losing Sandra that I forgot I was losing you. And I told myself you were fine, that you were strong, that you didn't need I don't know. I just kept telling myself, we're fine. Fathers are people too." I said, "We get cold. We get lonely. We feel it when our children choose someone else's comfort over their dignity." Daniel reached across the table and put his hand over mine. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We sat like that for a while. Just the two of us at a kitchen table, the way we used to in the old days, when he was small and the world was simple, and I was the person he ran to when he was scared. I thought, it's not too late. It's not too late for this. And that right there was worth every cold step through that blizzard. I am still 72 years old. My toes are fully healed now, by the grace of God, and the skill of a good doctor. I walk with a slight shuffle, but I always did. My cardigan has the hole in the elbow. I still haven't fixed it. I think about that night sometimes. Not with bitterness, not anymore. With something closer to understanding. Because here is what I know. After 72 years of living, people will sometimes let you down. Even the ones you love most. Even the ones you gave everything to. That is not a reason to stop loving them. It is not a reason to become bitter or cold, but it is also not something you should accept in silence forever. Dignity is not something other people can take from you. It is something you carry inside, but you have to choose to carry it. Sandra believed that by controlling Daniel, by isolating him from me, by fabricating lies and engineering my removal, she was building something. A secure life, a husband who belonged entirely to her. What she was actually doing was building a house on rotten wood. And I know something about wood. Rotten wood looks fine for a while. It holds weight for a while. And then one day, without warning, it gives way. I do not hate Sandra. I genuinely do not. She was a frightened, insecure woman who had never learned that love is not a competition with a fixed supply. She believed that my presence in Daniel's life made her poorer. She was wrong. My presence, any grandparent's presence, any parent's presence, makes everyone richer. But she couldn't see that, and no one ever taught her. For my son Daniel, I believe he is learning. It is slow. It is painful. But I believe he is learning that being a good husband does not mean surrendering your conscience. That loving your wife does not mean abandoning your father. That the most important thing you can teach your child is not ambition or success. It is how to treat people who cannot give you anything in return. Tommy, my grandson, 9 years old and full of stories, will grow up knowing his grandfather. That is not nothing. That is everything. And for anyone listening to this story who recognizes something in it, who is nodding because they have felt invisible in a house that should have been their home, who has stayed silent through disrespect because they did not want to cause trouble, who has given everything and been told they are a burden, you are not a burden. You never were. The people who called you that they were struggling with something inside themselves. Your worth was never theirs to calculate. And for those of you on the other side who have perhaps let someone down, who have allowed someone else's voice to drown out your own conscience, who have closed a door on someone who loved you, it is not too late. It is almost never too late. Pick up the phone, drive to the house, sit across the table. Don't explain, don't justify. Just say, I see you, I'm sorry, I'm here. That is enough to begin. My name is Harold Eugene Mercer. I am 72 years old. I walked 2 miles in a blizzard with a hole in my cardigan, and I am still here. Still telling stories. If this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone you've lost, or something you still have time to fix, please don't scroll away without leaving a like and a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me about the people in your life who never gave up on you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Every week, we bring you real stories about real people, stories about love, about loss, about the things that matter most. Because at the end of the day, the only things we truly leave behind are the ways we made other people feel. Take care of your people while you still can. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next story.